So anyways, Rex Murphy weighed in on things in a brilliant column in the National Post, their most read item of the month for sure. It's this one: Canada is not a racist country, despite what the Liberals say. To any fair mind, Canada is a mature, welcoming, open-minded, and generous country. It would be helpful if these Liberals kept the full story of this country in mind when discussing racism. The full story, I think that's the key. In a country centuries old, with millions of people, there have been atrocious moments, either by today's standards or even by standards of the past, sure. But tell the full story, please. How much are racism and discrimination actually a part of Canadian reality? Are they overwhelmingly present? Are they, in McKenna's view, a central part of Canadian life? Where do they manifest themselves? Are some provinces more racist and discriminatory than others? Those are good questions, and I can assure you that Rex has spent more time thinking about McKenna's statements than McKenna did. Do we not have welcoming immigration policies? Our largest cities, not a great montage of people from every corner of the world, of every color and creed? Do we not, both in private and public, to celebrate Canada's multicultural nature? Do our schools not press the ideas of tolerance and acceptance towards all peoples and all faiths from kindergarten through high school? Is it not a doctrine of Canadian civic life that to end any trace of discrimination or racism is a cardinal rationale for the very existence of modern Canada? Of course, I mean, it's so obvious, it's amazing that anyone had to say it. But what an outrage it was that he did say it. How dare he, the racist, by championing anti-racism and saying Canada was in fact anti-racist. Don't you know that thereby Rex just proved how racist he was? I mean, that's the riddle of it. If you say you're not racist, well, that is the proof that you are racist, because only a racist would say he's not racist. I saw this tweet in response by a co-worker of Rex Murphy. I unfortunately had to click on and read this horrifying column in its entirety in order to write an email to my editor expressing my utter disappointment that we decided to run it. There's no point reading it. I assure you, there's nothing to learn here. By the way, she didn't provide a link to Rex Murphy's article, just a screenshot of it. She didn't want to infect anyone else, you see. Here's what I wrote in reply to that comment. I said, a journalist telling people not to read the other side of the story is closed-minded, but a journalist telling people not to read her own newspaper is not trustworthy. Why would she continue to work there against her own conscience? Not someone I can trust. That's the thing. I mean, her name is Vanmala Subramaniam, and as you can see by her LinkedIn biography, she is a business writer for the same newspaper. She writes for the Financial Post section of the National Post. And before that, she worked for Vice. And before that, she worked for Bloomberg. And before that, she worked for CBC. So you can see her life in Canada has been blocked by systemic racism. Just no opportunities at all. But like I said, what an odd reply to snipe at your own newspaper, but to take its money. It's almost like she was just virtue signaling. And actually, when push comes to shove, puts money ahead of principles. Well, to their credit, instead of firing Vanmala for disparaging their newspaper as racist, the National Post invited her to make her case. I confess I had never heard of Vanmala before, so I was unfamiliar with her work. I would have thought she would have taken this unique opportunity to make a convincing case, but yeah, no. Let me take you through some of it. It's quite remarkable. Here it is. She says, before you declare Canada is not a racist country, do your homework. Okay. I'm always open to doing homework. She says, Rex Murphy, the conservative commentator, former CBC radio host, and a 73-year-old white man, is convinced that racism does not exist in this country and that the vast majority of Canadians would never participate in it. Okay, hang on. Is that an argument? Her very first sentence, which I always think is the most important sentence, is chastising Rex Murphy for being a certain age and a certain race? You're an old white man. That's not an argument. And you know, it's a little bit racist. She says that Rex effectively erases centuries of history that pertain to the founding of this nation. No, I'm not sure he did, by the way. I think he was saying that Canada is not a racist country. I'm not sure if he's going back to historical issues, and I'll come back to this, but she mocks Rex's points, including the fact that Canada had welcoming immigration policies. She recaps Rex's points with some spin, and then she says this. It is perhaps too obvious to state that someone who has absolutely no lived experience of racism, discrimination, bigotry, who has never been anything other than accepted, who has clearly no interest in really understanding race issues in this country beyond performative platitudes and slogans pushed forward by corporate institutions and the political class, should not be weighing in on the subject of racism. Oh, that's a lot of sociology terms there. So there you have it. It's like we talked about yesterday in my interview with Philip Slayton. You don't make arguments anymore. You just check the right identity boxes and it's decided. If you're a 73-year-old white man, don't even open your mouth. If you don't have a lived experience of racism, you should not be talking because your ideas don't work. Because no one has lived a tougher life than Vanmala Subramaniam, who was clearly born in the ghetto and had to sit at the back of the bus and drink from the water fountain that said colored people only and had KKK crosses burning on her front yard. I mean, the racist hardships she has faced in life, she can talk about Canada, but not you. And apparently, actually growing up poor in Newfoundland doesn't teach anyone about hardship and overcoming challenges, but working for Vice and the CBC does. Hey, can I stop and point out something here before I continue? Vanmala Subramaniam is not black. She's just not. I think it's a Tamil name. Tamils are rather newcomers to Canada. They weren't interned in the Second World War. That was the Japanese. They weren't given second-class citizenship and forced to live on a reserve. Those are Indians. Like I say, I had never heard of her before, so I just Googled her. And here's just a random sample of what I found.
Steve, there were a couple of sensible things I thought. So for one, just basic things like making sure there's no peak electricity rates for the next 45 days, deferring interest payments on student loans.
So I think I hear a foreign accent, as in she came here pretty recently. She hasn't actually lived Canadian racism herself. Neither did her parents, obviously, or her grandparents. They might have lived under racism, but it wasn't here in Canada. Subramaniam didn't hear stories growing up about, I don't know, how it was like to be Irish in Montreal in the 1850s, or how it was like to be black in Halifax in the 1920s, or Jewish in Montreal in the 1950s. So she's not from here. She actually doesn't know the lived experience here. In fact, the one thing she knows about is what she mocked Rex about, our welcoming immigration policies. That's her lived experience. What does she know about our past, racist or not, that Rex Murphy doesn't, who has lived here for 73 years and surely has memories of what his parents and grandparents told him, memories maybe that stretch back 400 years of Newfoundland? Yeah, if you're a newcomer, mocking someone for living here for 73 years is not persuasive when you're saying you know Canada better than Rex does. But remember who we're talking about here, a journalist in a newspaper. I had never heard of this woman before. She looks modestly successful, I guess. Rex is a national star, easily the biggest draw in the National Post since the untimely passing of Christy Blatchford. But they're both writers for a living. They both depend on freedom of speech. But Vanmala Subramaniam has apparently decided that free speech is not a Canadian value. People like Rex should not be weighing in on the subject of racism. They certainly should not be allowed to declare that racism is over, nor be given a national platform to do so. Hang on. So it's one thing for her to say, I don't think you should talk. That's a kind of rhetorical bullying, just telling someone to shut up. That's not argument. That's not discourse. It frankly makes me doubt the quality of her journalism. Does she just tell people to shut up if they have facts or arguments that don't fit her preconceived narrative for a story? Sounds pretty close-minded to me, which is not the mark of a good reporter. But she moves quickly from, I don't think Rex should weigh in, to he should not, to, she says, he most certainly should not be allowed to say that Canada is not racist, and certainly not in a national platform. So he shouldn't talk at all about racism, but if he dares to talk about racism, he absolutely should not say Canada isn't racist. And for sure, he shouldn't be given a platform for that. He shouldn't be allowed? Someone should stop him? Ban him? So now an employee of the National Post who's worked there for 1 year and 10 months according to her LinkedIn biographer. She's telling the newspaper that she definitely should never publish things that Rex Murphy has to say if she doesn't agree with them. I couldn't help but notice that Vanmala Subramaniam worked at Vice for also 1 year and 11 months before the Post, and she worked at Bloomberg for only 5 months before that. Yeah, I'm not sure what's going on there, but it sort of makes me laugh that she's telling the National Post who is or isn't allowed to write in it. I wonder if that's why she left those other places. But what makes me cry after laughing is that the National Post ran this self-abasing piece, crapping all over them. Not that Rex Murphy shouldn't be challenged. Why not? And it's a good idea for the National Post to host debates, even about its star writers. Perfect place. But this is the argument. Hey guys, I'm brown, Rex is white, QED, debate over. Yeah, no, I don't think so. But let me show you one more thing. I mentioned that Vanmala Subramaniam is Tamil, I think. And that means a Tamil name, and she has an accent. So she's from Sri Lanka. So she's brown, not black. She's not African American. And I'm sorry to talk about these things. In my mind, this is all irrelevant. But it's the basis of her entire argument from her very first sentence. So would you permit me? So she's brown, a newcomer to Canada. Looks like she's never had a hard day in her life here. Came here to get away from her home country, I guess. But look at what she does. For the rest of the op-ed, she talks about anecdotes of black people. Let me quote. Because the Canada that Rex Murphy says is not racist is the same Canada where his own former black colleague, the esteemed television journalist Dwight Drummond, host of CBC Toronto's Evening News, was handcuffed by police, face down on streetcar tracks, with guns, plural, trained on him and his friend for the crime of leaving his home to get takeout in downtown Toronto, unquote. Okay, now again, I didn't know who she was talking about or what she was talking about, so I Googled it. So apparently, back in the year 1995, 25 years ago, Dwight Drummond was arrested, and people claimed it was racial profiling. So a 25-year-old anecdote, and let's say that that's accurately what happened. That let's just say it was because he was black. I don't know if that's a fact. Even if it were the case, is that your proof that Canada is a racist society? That anecdote. Let me read some more. It is the same Canada where the CBC investigative journalist Asha Tomlinson, another former black colleague of Murphy's, said her brother, while a teenager in the predominantly non-white Toronto suburb of Scarborough, was repeatedly stopped and interrogated by police on drives to the corner store over nothing. Okay, I hadn't heard of that either, so I read an article about this woman's brother as a teenager. When my brother was a teenager in the early 1990s, living in Toronto's eastern suburb of Scarborough, he would drive to our corner store to get candy and pop all the time. That is until he started to get stopped by police. They would question him, asking where he was going, why he was out at night. And that's it. That's the story. Again, maybe it was racism, although there's actually nothing racial about the story. Just a teenager being asked what he's doing out at night in a car by police. Could be because he was black. Could be because he was a teen. We don't actually know. Also, it's a 25-year-old anecdote, and that's your proof that the Canada we live in today is racist and why Rex Murphy has to shut up. She cites a few more anecdotes. There are plenty of anecdotes in a country of 37 million people. Some of them involve criminals or police shooting criminals or accused criminals. Some is just gossip. They're so rare that she has to reach back 25 years. It's hard to make that case. When so many police in 2020 are black, including, the chief of police for Subramaniam's own city, Subramaniam didn't live any of this, though. This wasn't her lived experience. I don't even know if she was here 25 years ago, judging by her accent and her age. So she didn't live this. But again, she's not black. And that's important because the black grievance in America comes in large part from their history of slavery. And then the history of segregation and Jim Crow laws. And I'm sorry, we just didn't have that up here. We just didn't. And thank God we didn't. But what's the angle here? Why is Subramaniam trying to appropriate the American black experience? She's not American. She's not black. She's not a descendant of American slaves. It's a bit pitiful, but I think it's transparent. I don't really buy into the concept of cultural appropriation. Subramaniam has appropriated the English language and other Western concepts, not her native Tamil ones. Hey, me too, I'm Jewish, and I even appropriated the Christian custom of calling the year 2020 counting from Jesus' birth. And I'm not even Christian. I eat Chinese food and drive a Japanese car, but I'm not pretending I'm part of the experience of descendants of American slaves just to get some weird clout. But the weird thing, the extra weird thing, is it's the same over at the Toronto Star, by the way. They have a professional, full-time race huckster over there called Shri Paradkar. It's literally all she writes about. She is paid to call Canadians racist every time. It's her beat. She's been in overdrive these past few weeks about black civil rights in America, but how do I put this gently? She's not black. She's not American. And she just came here too, judging by her accent.
So say, you know what, there's a couple people that are bad, we'll never root it out, but there's no institutionalized systemic racism, certainly not in Quebec. What do you make of that?
My first thought was, well, here is another white guy in power telling us that racism doesn't exist, right? And I don't know, based on what he says it. It made me sad because I wish we moved away from this framing of does racism exist to what are we going to do about it? Because I feel like in so many ways, this denial of racism is a denial of basic dignity, particularly of Black and First Nations Métis and Inuit people.
See, do you think she's ever lived in Quebec, that she even speaks French? I mean, she's still working on her English, sounds like. Hey, as the saying goes, if someone has an accent, that means they speak one more language than you do. So good for her for learning English so well, better than I know any other language. But for her to condemn the entire province of Quebec as racist, yeah, no. I love that little flourish at the end. She has appointed herself as the spokesman for Black people and Aboriginal people, and I didn't catch her whole list. Maybe she might talk about the racism of India's caste system if she's bored, lived experience stuff, but that might take some introspection rather than smearing the country that has welcomed her and given her such privileges. These people are such ingrates. Who would move to a country to call its people racist for a living? If you think it's a racist, why didn't you hear? I kid you not, that is her job description, but you heard her, she really said it. If you deny you're racist, that is proof you're racist. I think that's how it used to work with witches. I think if you threw them into the water, only a witch would float. If someone wasn't a witch, they would drown. Denial of racism demands no change, no accountability. It is complicity. Oh, really? See, I wonder if that applies to her. I'm just kidding. Of course, she's racist, like Vanmala Subramaniam. It's essential that she attacks people for being white. That's not racist, you see, but not being racist is racist, you see. Here's a race journalist at the Globe and Mail. Again, seriously, that is her beat. Dakshana Bhaskaramurthy. Also a Tamil name, I think. She writes, was so happy to see Vanmala write this biting evisceration of that terrible Rex Murphy column. But why did she, one of the only racialized National Post writers, have to do it? Would have been nice to see one of her white colleagues stick their neck out instead. Well, Dakshana, didn't you read the column? White people are not allowed to talk about race, especially old white men. Let me read to you that part of Vanmala's column again. It is perhaps too obvious to state that someone who has absolutely no lived experience of racism, discrimination, bigotry, who has never been anything other than accepted, who has clearly no interest in really understanding race issues in this country beyond performative platitudes and slogans pushed forward by corporate institutions and the political class, should not be weighing in on the subject of racism. So shut up, white people, about race. You can't weigh in on the subject of race either way. Oh, but you're racist if you don't weigh in on the subject of race, and you're racist if you're not a racist. Look, I want to tell you, I really admire people from India and from Sri Lanka. I don't want to stereotype, but I think people from India are often very smart and industrious and successful and extremely hardworking, very studious, excellent students. I think it's okay to stereotype people for admirable qualities. I hope you agree, because I'm sort of a fan of people from India. And every Tamil I know is a wonderful person. I'm just telling you my biases. In both Canada and the United States, we collect census data on people based on race. Did you know that? In the United States, it's quite detailed. In North America, it's pretty much the same in both Canada and the United States. In North America, did you know that Asians make more money than any other race does? Double what black people earn on average. And amongst Asian people, obviously Asia is a big continent, Indian Americans and Indo-Canadians have a higher household income than any other Asian group. Just way, way, way ahead of everyone else. Tamils too. So my point is, you're not black. You were never a slave or a descendant of slaves. You're rich. The average Indo-Canadian is a lot richer, by the way, than the average Newfoundlander. So what's going on here? This isn't about legitimate grievances. This is about racism. It's about the left using racism to silence their own enemies and to get rich, I think. There's actually no one more privileged in Canada than Indo-Canadians and Tamils. And I think that's great. I'm so glad Canada is a good match for the intelligence and entrepreneurial spirit of so many people. But stop pretending that you're a victim. Stop pretending that this country is racist. It's actually been far better to you than your home country. And can you do me a favor? Can you stop pretending that you're black? Vanmala Subramaniam just can't stop writing y'all and pretending she's some ghetto gangster with rapper street cred. What are you doing? You're a rich Tamil girl. Do a victory lap. You won the lottery in life. I mean, take it from Dakshana and some other rich grievance mongers just profiteering here in this bizarre video produced by the Globe and Mail. Listen to these guys.
Cultural appropriation is theft.
Theft. Theft.
Yeah, guys, stop stealing from George Floyd, okay? It's not always about you. We know you like calling people names, but can you stop using dead American black men to promote your own Canadian careers as scolds? And if you want to take a run at Rex Murphy, try criticizing his arguments, not his skin color, you racists. That's an excerpt from my daily show, The Ezra Levant Show. Every day I do a monologue on the news of the day, then I interview an interesting guest, and then I read my hate mail. You gotta subscribe. Go to rebelnews.com.